Dashboard Effect podcast. I'm Brick Thompson.
I'm Caleb Oakes.
Hey, Caleb. Today we thought we might talk about how you're using data in OneLake. Is it OneLake? Dang it.
Well, I'm using in
Azure
Data Lake. But I think the concepts that we're going to talk about are still they're kind of like the same, right?
Okay.
Right. And I think that's kind of the key of what we want to talk about today is how Microsoft is thinking about OneLake and how right now, at least how we're doing, building out some models and stuff by keeping some of those concepts alive. The biggest one being one copy of your data.
Right. So you're not, for different projects, you're not pulling data all over the place, like having a set of data inside an import model in a Power BI, for example, or inside of Excel or something like that.
Right. Or just, having a copy of your data in one layer and then another one until you finally get to your end result, and people are using stuff in between. Like, you don't want to do any of that stuff because then you've got one person, you got one version of data, another person who's got another because the job failed or whatever.
How to keep them in sync.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Okay. All right. So how are you approaching that now? I know you just did a project for a client, you and the team. Got them going on all the time that are like this, but this one came to mind for you this afternoon.
Yeah, so I actually did a lot of the work on this one. So the client now they've got a bunch of data sources, but we're starting with one, and we created a model for it. And the way that we set things up is we've got an Azure Data Lake, and we pipe the data into Parquet and Delta files. And then we build our model with serverless views on top of that. So it's just querying those Delta files and then shaping it with SQL into a way that's going to work really well for our Power BI model, so we can ultimately build the reports that we want. So we decided to pull in another data source, and a little bit of background on how this used to work in the old days.
Yeah.
Is you would have a database. You would have technically you could have done this in this database, but I don't think anybody thought of it because database tools had a lot of things built in, like constraints, and when I say constraints, like foreign keys and primary keys and auto incrementing IDs and things like that. And the tools now are just better for doing this type of thing. Delta files and Parquets and stuff they're just better for handling large amounts of data and doing what I'm about to explain.
Right.
So I'll get into it. All right. So you've got so anyway, we brought in the other data source all into its own area in the data lake in its own Parquet and Delta files. And then inside of our serverless SQL, what we ended up doing is unioning and creating views on top of those files that queried the files individually and created our common dimensions like customer and item, salesperson, location, things like that. So when you look at like our serverless SQL database, it's kind of hard to call that a database because it's really just an engine.
And you should probably explain what serverless SQL means.
Yeah, so serverless SQL is it's really just compute on top of your files. So you've got your files sitting in Data Lake. That's different than like a standard database. In a standard database, you actually load the data into a database, and that database maintains
like a SQL Server database.
Yeah, it'll maintain like statistics and stuff on it. Parquet and Delta files don't have. It's not a database, right? So it's nice because you can query that with a bunch of different tools. It kind of opens the door to more options for you. So serverless sits on top of that and allows you to write code against those files and manipulate that data.
In T-SQL.
Yeah, T-SQL.
So people who are familiar with using a SQL Server can still write views and so on the way they're used to, but they're not having to write it against a SQL Server database. They're writing it against the Parquet files in the data lake. Okay,
right.
Great.
Exactly. So the nice thing about that is that, as we were saying earlier, it's one copy of data, right? You're just querying those files and shaping it the way that you want. Now, that might give you some concern about performance, and believe me, I've also had those same concerns. Serverless SQL has completely blown me away at how well it performs. And I'm doing pretty basic stuff like some joins and some CTEs, and I wouldn't say super advanced. I wouldn't say super beginner, kind of intermediate type stuff in this SQL, but it performs really, really well. We're talking like 3 million rows in our fact table, and it'll, it refreshes in like 3 minutes. So it's really impressive. So anyway, so we put that layer of SQL on top of these files in our serverless SQL. And then when you're looking at the objects inside of your serverless SQL database, you see, just your standard, like here's your customer dimension, here's your item dimension, here's
Just
your
looks like
sales
what you're
fact
used
table.
to. Yeah.
Looks like what you're used to. So the great thing about that, like I said, you have one copy of data in your data lake, and then now you've got this, I would call it the semantic model on top of that, that's pulling together two totally different systems and making them look like one, so you can have consolidated reporting across both of those in both those business units.
So it's what we used to do in the old days, where we would load the data from both of those systems into a SQL Server and then do all kinds of work to get it so that we've got conform dimensions and those types of things, and then do reporting views to make your semantic model there. But you're not having to be constrained by all the things that we are constrained by being in a SQL Server. You can just load it into the data lake. You can write that semantic model using your serverless SQL just against the data that you want to. You might have other data sources in there. You might have all kinds of stuff in there, but you produce this semantic model layer, this view for the user that makes it really easy for someone who is used to that star schema type approach to reporting to deal with their stuff.
Right, exactly. I think what I like about it most is that it's kind of like what we used to do inside of like a data warehouse, where you would do that, a bunch of that transformation is some SQL code, but then you'd load it actually to another physical table.
Right. Right.
And with the way that serverless works, there might still be like, really heavy data cleansing work that you need to do where you still would want to do that just for performance sake. But in most cases for us, just doing that, having those queries directly on top of the data simplifies things a lot, right? You don't have, like, for example, I'll give you an example. So if something was wrong, let's say in that separate physical table, usually a fact table, one of the troubleshooting steps would be, okay, go look at the SQL that puts that table together and kind of try and piece it together and like, where did it go wrong, right? Now, the way that you would do that is that it's just one step.
Yeah.
Like, you're not having to say, okay, what happened here?
Let me go back and look at staging.
Like, what happened? It's just, no, you just query that. Like, as long as that query is good, you're still good. You don't have to worry about missing an update. You don't have to worry about, something going wrong in a procedure or it failing halfway through or whatever. You just run your query against your data.
Because it's kind of raw data sitting in there in the Parquet files.
Yeah,
that's cool. All right, so you're doing that in Azure Data Lake right now. Fabric OneLake is out, and we've used it some. Some people are using it a lot, but it's not quite at parity with Azure Data Lake, but it's close, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty close. I think some of the code actually gets a little bit simpler inside of Fabric, which is nice. The reason why in this particular instance why we're not in Fabric and why we won't be for I don't know how long for them and these scenarios is that we're pulling data from an on-prem SQL server, and you have to have an integration runtime or a data gateway to pull data into the cloud or into OneLake or into Azure Data Lake.
And that's a little agent sitting on that SQL server.
And right now, those are not supported inside of Fabric pipelines.
Okay.
So we're doing it in Azure.
That's got to be around the corner. I mean, it has to be.
I think so. Yeah. I'm actually surprised it didn't come with it right out of the box. But there are other ways you can do it. They're just not well suited for moving a bunch of data.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. All right. Well, I like the case study there, and we're going to just keep we're doing more and more of this, getting more or better at it. I have a feeling, the whole industry has been moving this way for the last 3 years or so, but it's really becoming mainstream. And I think the Azure Data Lake and the Fabric OneLake, the performance is what really makes it easy to do. Like, you don't have to go back to the SQL Server to get the performance you want. Generally, sounds like there might be some cases still where you would do that, but
but your SQL Server is going to have the same. It's going to choke on that too. And it's just it gets into some heavier data engineering questions. But yeah, you're right.
All right. Okay. Well, I think that's good for today. Oh, Nicole's going to kill us.
Yeah, you say it.
Please hit that subscribe button.
Yep. Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Yeah, if you like the content.
Yep.
All right. Thanks.